Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 1, which is actually episode 2. We recorded episode 0 last week, and that was kind of our test episode of Library Access, a Keyforge podcast. This podcast is brought to you by thekeyforge.com, the number one Keyforge fan site on the internet. I figured we should jump right into it. It's been a week since we last gathered. We've had a week to buy more decks and test them out and trade and sell and get mad about it and study it and all that. With that being said, how's your Keyforge progress been? Have you been going to tournaments? Have you been playing with friends? Has your opinion changed on it since last week? Anything along those lines? Anyone want to jump right in?
Yeah, sure. So kind of all of the above. Been playing multiple events. Playing with one of my friends quite a bit. He's the kind of the guy who we both jumped in at the same time, so we do a lot of just opening decks and playing together. Went to a couple of reversal events and then a sealed event on Tuesday, and I'm still loving the game. I feel like every time I play in these events or with different decks, it's something new, something to explore. And the reversal format has proved interesting. Not perfect necessarily, but it's definitely an interesting alternative to the Archon stuff. Um, yeah, looking forward to see what comes in the near future with our local events because we're doing everything we can to keep things going and recruiting new people. So
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like you've been pretty busy with it. With the exception of your reversal events, do you tend to stick to a single deck, or do you switch it up? Or I guess it would depend if you're playing sealed or something like that. But assuming you're not, do you have kind of a deck that you've landed on that you like?
that's and that's kind of the issue. Like I have a couple decks I like. Um, like actually I have my list here with me, so if people that are listening are interested in pulling any of them up. So like the first deck I opened from like the first launch event, so my first or pre-launch event, it was my first ever deck, was Cho of Brownburn. um and it's Untamed, Shadows, Dis, and it has 3 moon curses in it, so it's like death touch, first strike, basically poison and skirmish on all 3 of those guys, and they steal every time they fight. It's pretty powerful, but it was a pretty fun one, pretty controlly. It was actually pretty decent, and since it was my first deck, kind of have a bit of attachment to it. And another deck was one I traded for from a friend called Killian Creepinghurst Hooligan, which is a Mars heavy deck. I don't know what the other 2 houses were in that one. Oh, Untamed and Dis as well. And it's got some decent creatures, so it can build boards, especially with Mars. It's actually one of the few Mars decks I have that have a really good creature board, as well as some control. Then it also has some Untamed control option, or not control, but Amber Rush options like Key Charge and Dust Pixie with Nature's Call. So it has some combos in it as well as some heavy hitting Mars, and I've played that one quite a bit. I played it in our Archon event we had once, but otherwise, it's been a whole bunch of new decks, and it's kind of been the issue. Me and my friend, we went through a box each, basically opening a deck, playing it, and then swapping sides or swapping decks and playing the other ones. So most of my decks have only been played once or twice, and that's that's a whole other issue. But it's still fun. But right now, me and him are both trying to kind of go back and play some of the other decks and kind of dig through what we have, see what we enjoy, what we think is actually strong, and to have prepared for any upcoming events.
What about you guys? What have you been up to the past week in the Keyforge world? And same question goes to you. If you guys kind of tend to stick to a single deck, or if you've been busy testing all sorts of them out.
Yeah, I've been playing all kinds of different decks. I've got probably about 15 now, and of course, I have my 2 or 3 favorites.
Mhm.
Um, Me and a buddy here locally are the ones kind of leading the community where we are, and so we've got together probably half a dozen times and just played all kinds of different decks. There's probably three or so that I've kind of played the most and jumped on Crucible and tested with them a significant amount as well.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I've probably played every single one of my decks at least once. But it usually comes down to whenever I feel like I want to really, dominate or just really get used to a few of my decks. There's been probably, like I said, 2 or 3 that I've really enjoyed. Um, the main one, I guess, has been called Marco Immortal Leather Benedictus. Um, it's got on the disc, so it's a disc Logos Shadows deck. Um, on the disc side, it's actually pretty creature heavy. So there's Charette, two Ember Imps, which can really be annoying. Snudge, Toxin are in there as well. So lots of like creatures that kind of disrupt what you're doing, which is obviously is what disc does. But the kind of centerpiece of the disc cards is Overlord Grekking, which is a lot of fun. So he's a 7 power creature, and his text is after an enemy creature is destroyed fighting Overlord Grekking, put that creature into play under your control. So basically, with him being 7 power, unless they have a way to get rid of him right away, there's been scenarios where I've taken over my opponent's 2 or 3 of my opponent's creatures. In fact, last night my friend was over. He was playing a Fagin with I think 3 or 4 Urchins deck, and I managed. I don't have any, even though I have shadows in my deck. I don't have any Urchins in my deck, but I was able to take his Fagin over. He didn't quite have any answers to remove any of my creatures on the board, like any board wipes or anything like that. And he had Urchins on the board, and the text on Fagin says, remove or take an Urchin back to your hand, or you can take an Urchin back to your hand from play. So I was actually able to steal his Urchins using his Fagin, which was really fun. So it's kind of silly the fun things that can happen in this game when you don't expect it at all, right? I had no idea that was even a combo. Yeah, and then so the Logos is probably the highlight. I mean, there's Shadows is in this deck too, and Shadows does what it does. It's just got a lot of that stealing and characters that steal, and there's nothing too exciting on the Shadow side. But it's really the Logos side of this deck that shines. So it's got 2 Doctor Escateras, which is sorry, it's got. I'll start that over. It's got a Doc Bookton, which is Reap Draw a card. It's got 3 Ganymede Archivists, which is Reap Archive a card, and 3 Mothers. So, and it's also got a Library of Babel and a Chaos Portal. So the Chaos Portal and Library of Babel are both artifacts that allow you to potentially use cards off the top of your deck. And then those 6 creatures, the 3 archivists and the 3 mothers, are all characters that, or creatures that will let you draw or archive. So basically, the bottom line is that this Logos package lets you fly through your deck and find all the answers that you need when you need them. So if those Logos creatures get out of hand and get out on the board, it's really, really tough for your opponent to kind of keep up.
I have a rule question. If you have 2 Mother out at the same time, do you refill your hand to 2 additional cards?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. So when I've got 2, like it's just fun to play an entire game with 7 to 9 extra cards in your hand, and like Mother is a 5 power creature, so she's not that easy to just wipe off the board.
Right. Sure. Sounds like an interesting deck to play. Maybe not so interesting to play against. Well, interesting maybe, but frustrating. Jack, what about you?
Yeah, I really love this game. I feel like, especially after listening to you guys describe the certain decks that you have and the play styles that you like to take on with them, I have to say I love this game because every deck has its own personality.
Mhm.
Even if it's got the same combination of houses, if it has a different set of cards, it plays differently. It'll play board, it could play control, it could do all sorts of
Yep.
different things than the very next deck that is the same house. So a lot of people are like, "Oh, I opened 3 packs in a row and they were all Brobnar, Mars, and Dis." And it's like, okay, but each one plays totally differently, I'm sure. And for me personally, my channel wouldn't be called Thievery Forge if I didn't like to steal Ember. So I love Shadows. I love this. And surprisingly, what I find to be the best house with them is Sanctum. So my favorite deck right now is a combination of that three, and it relies on a lot of theft from shadows, of course. But on this side, we have capture cards. So things like Sharets, um, Drumble, not Drumble. Yeah, I think Drumble. And on Sanctum, a lot of capture. So for me, for my playstyle, what I like to do is steal as much as possible and make sure you don't forge at all. If you try to get the six, I'm going to. I just want to take you down one, because you don't need to worry about your opponent having zero. You just have to worry about them not having six to forge that key. So if you can keep pushing them off and delaying them turn by turn, and try and get a little bit here and a little bit there, you could essentially outpace them, and no matter what they put on the board, it's not going to matter. And with my favorite deck now, I found that a lot of times, if my opponent is playing slow in the beginning, I have to play slow, otherwise I have nothing to steal. So that could be a slight drawback, but I love this game. Every deck is unique, and just your player skill is drawn out more so than what you have in your hand. It's how you put the combinations together. I think that that's really highlighted in Keyforge versus any other card game.
Speaking of which, that's a nice segue into our next topic. Um, Coming from other card games, assuming you've played other card games in the past, or even if not, what have been the hardest parts of Keyforge to get used to? Whether it be just a brand new rule or a rule that's differs from something that's deeply ingrained from Magic or something like that, or Hearthstone.
So I don't have too much to add on this topic, because I didn't find too much hard to get used to, but I've played a lot of FFG card games, and they tend to use some similar mechanics. Um, and the whole reverse of your turn, where you draw at the end of your turn, untap at the end of your turn, was kind of similar to the Warhammer Champions card game I was playing for a while, where it's kind of reversed. The things I've had the hardest time with is just kind of remembering certain keywords that aren't really bolded out like taunt. Like I don't know how many times I and other players have missed taunt on a card because it doesn't really stand out. Same with elusive for that matter, because people will attack something, it's like, oh, I'm gonna kill that, and I take damage. Like, no, you don't. um, it, it's just that, and that's really more of a text templating issue than anything else. Um, but I think having played so many other card games in my past, breaking into this system really wasn't that bad. But I've seen a lot of people, especially from Magic, because if this game's actually pulling in a lot of Magic players, which a lot of the other LCGs or FFG card games didn't really do as much. They have a big issue of not drawing at the beginning of their turn, not untapping at the beginning of their turn, and even just thinking combat is all about, or the game's all about combat rather, and getting creatures on the board and attacking things is what you need to be doing, which is the opposite typically of what you need to be doing. So not so bad for myself, but I've seen a lot of other people having that issue.
Yeah, I'll echo that. Like I found, at least in the very beginning, um, obviously not so much anymore. After you get a dozen or so games into you, you kind of get used to these things. But um, I found that you feel like unless you have a bunch of creatures on the board and they don't, or you're killing all their creatures, it didn't feel like you were winning. It felt like the board presence was, whether or not you were winning. And especially with my main deck that I've been playing, it doesn't have a huge board presence. It has a ton of steel, a ton of amber control, and a ton of cards that just generate amber. It's got two ghostly hands. It's got a treasure map. It's got two dust pixies, hunting witch with a bunch of untamed creatures. It just has a ton of ways to like generate amber, but it doesn't have a really big board presence. And I found that like I was winning all my games, but like during the game, it felt like I was losing the entire time because I'd never had a really good board presence. Meanwhile, my opponent has 8 creatures on the board, but I've got 2 keys forged. So it's like really the amber and the forging of keys is the main thing that we have to be concerned about, and that's kind of a thing that, depending on what games you're coming from, is the opposite of what you're used to. The other thing that I found was a little bit different to get used to was the fact that there's no there's no resource, there's no cost to play any of these cards. So I've been mainly a Star Wars Destiny player for the last couple of years. And when evaluating cards and deciding what cards to play, it's always like checking how much, resources you have, and when you're evaluating a card, whether or not it's worth the amount of resources you'd have to pay, etc. So that's been kind of a little bit of a weird thing getting used to. It's just like if you have the card, you're playing that house, you can just play it straight up.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. Especially because I don't have a lot of card game experience. I played Yu-Gi-Oh a long time ago when I was young, and then I played a little bit of Magic super casually. I guess I didn't even play Magic. I learned Magic. And then I played lots of Hearthstone. And just like you said, just trying to still to this day, trying to talk myself out of thinking, it's the board control kind of thing. Just having to have creatures on the board, having to be fighting constantly, having to, you know, hope my opponent has less than me. Especially, I didn't get a chance to talk about my deck, and I don't need to, but a big part of it has a couple combos in there
Oh,
that rely on my opponent having a considerable number of creatures more than I do.
name
I
drop it.
get, I either, yeah, it's Librarian Heifetz. Um, Good luck spelling that.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, right. It's a fun one. Play with it on Crucible a little bit. It's not great. It's kind of what's been getting my attention right now. Um, I went and bought a box, and I bought like 10 decks one day, and about every 2 days I'll pull a new one out and sleeve it and play around with it. So I've still got like 5 or 6 at my office, just kind of waiting to be played with. Um, but like I was saying, it's taken a lot of like rewiring my brain to stop me from just this blind kind of board control, throw creatures down, attack with them, this and that. Especially because my deck kind of rewards me for having an empty board, and using actions and things like that to get amber and to steal, and things like that. So that's definitely taking some getting used to, and it's going to continue to take some getting used to.
I think that might be partially why the four horsemen decks kind of jumped out as being this like incredible force in the game, which I think we're all realizing is not the case. Of course, they can be really good, but early when everybody has the mindset of having more creatures and controlling the board equals winning. Um, early in the game, that was the mindset for a lot of people. But as we're starting to realize that doesn't necessarily win you the game, the price of these four horsemen deck, and the realization that they're not just this godlike combination, is not necessarily the case. So that's been kind of interesting to see the very quick rise and shortfall of the four horsemen decks and prices.
That's interesting. Yeah, I hadn't considered that. That just it might be, we as a collective didn't know how to play Keyforge yet, and because of that, take that, find a way to magically convert that deck into a Magic deck, and you might succeed. But it doesn't work
That's
so much with how we're learning to play Keyforge.
Yeah, but I like that. That's what I like about Keyforge. It's so different from any other game that I've played. And I've played the big three, which is, Pokemon, Magic, Yu-Gi-Oh! And it feels all the same. It's go out, go buy the best card, go online and see what the best deck is for the current meta, and spend all your money on these specific cards to put your arrangement the way somebody else on the internet told you, so you can go and do what is I essentially call as a display. It's like a one of those pie contests, right? Like, here's my best pie. You're putting your best card out there, and you're hoping that card that you spent more on a better card than your opponent in front of you.
Well, and plot twist, the guy you're playing against, he brought the exact same fucking pie.
Right. And yeah, and it with Keyforge, it's different. It's a balancing act. It's a rush and a marathon to get those keys, but at the same time it's like you're rushing your opponent, and he can kind of elbow you to make you stumble for a bit so he gets the lead, and then you can kind of, it's like Mario Kart. It's like the Mario Kart of trading card games.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting way to put it.
I mean, that makes sense because that's kind of the appeal of the game is the sort of simplicity and quick pace of it. You know, with that Mario Kart reference, it like there's this kind of like back and forth, and then all of a sudden, wham bam, something really big happens. Um, and it's not like overly complex like some other card games that are out there, or super expensive either, for that matter, to kind of push out some of the people who want to play competitively but can't really afford to do so. Oh, and when I want on your comment you were making about um, like having to figure out how to play these decks, especially coming from other card games. I think that's part of the issue with all these posts we see on Facebook with, "Hey, check out my deck. How should I play it? Is it any good?" It's like you, even though it feels redundant for us all to constantly keep saying, "Hey, you just got to play it yourself." It's really true because you can't evaluate this deck or this game, especially this early on, with prior card game knowledge nearly as easily. And also, there are certain interactions you're not going to catch until you just drop it on the table and play it. It means nothing until you do that.
Sure. Sure. Well, and I think a lot of times those people are, they're super new to card games, and they probably suffer from the same thing I do, and it's that I can't recognize a meta. Like I just cannot do it. And that's why I didn't do well playing, Magic or anything like that. Like I lack whatever people have in their brain that lets them just look at a deck list and immediately recognize combos and build their deck around it and just know what's going to work. Like I can't do that yet. And I'm hoping with how young Keyforge is, 350 cards, that I'll be able to learn every one of those cards and just be one of those like savants that can see a card art from across the table and know, yeah, oh, I know exactly what that is. I know its power. I know all this. But I think what these people maybe are asking for, and when they say, hey, how's my deck? How does it look? Are maybe like identifying combos. Maybe they're hoping somebody will say, like, oh, this and this, in conjunction with each other will work well. But kind of like you said, there's some stuff that you just won't, you know the person asking, or the people kind of rating it and suggesting how it can be played, they're not going to recognize some of these big grand strange combos that wouldn't be seen until they actually made it to the board. So I don't know. I don't hate anyone for asking. Like it's I see it's the same post a couple dozen times a day, and like I'm sure a lot of people get irritated with it, but I just see it as somebody trying to learn and having fun. So I won't rag on them. I know, I kind of like you said, there's no real good answer to it.
Yeah, exactly. It's like I'm not proposing any sort of hate towards them, but I'm just saying, like from I guess from experience, from my I guess playing all these games, going through whole boxes or going to events. Like you can look at a list. I will pick out some key cards. Like when I did reversal, especially, I give my opponent a deck that I have an idea of how it's supposed to work, and then they give me a deck that I have never played before. So I pick out a few key cards. Like all right, guess I'm going for this. But then I play the game. It's like oh well, this actually works this way, and or I could do this, and that's what's so amazing about the game is the combo play or the card interactions that you oftentimes will not catch until you start playing, and it's really interesting.
Right. And I don't know how that equates to kind of, learning cards and studying and being able to recognize combos, but I feel like that's even more so true in whatever direction when it comes to like a sealed event. When you get that deck and you're opening it for the first time. So, you're, either I guess it'd be handy to have developed the ability to recognize little combos and stuff like that, but you know, it's not I guess it's not necessary to be that crazy Keyforge genius that can look at that deck list and know exactly how to play it, because you're going to be pretty equally matched with your opponent who's also opening their deck for the first time. And that's kind of piggyback off what the recurring theme this episode is, that that's why Keyforge I feel like is so interesting and unique. It's because it's I don't know, doing something that other card games haven't really done. I guess you can do whatever, a draft and Magic and stuff like that. But that still I couldn't do a draft because it relies so heavily on just recognizing a meta and like knowing how to build your deck, like, one card at a time. Like whatever it was called on Hearthstone, they had a similar game mode like that. And I failed at it every time because I can't see into the future with cards like that. So
Yeah, I think at very best, if you want to be like generally good at this game and being able to go into a sealed event and do well consistently, is that you'd have to just get really familiar with not necessarily each card in every house, but the general functionality of each house. So what is each house more or less trying to do, and what is each house more or less what are their strengths and weaknesses, right? So if you look at a deck and you see that it's got Mars Untamed Shadows, you can get an idea just by the houses of what they're probably going to be able to do and how to approach the game. So I think if you have a general knowledge of that, like it's probably a good starting point if you want to be a person who's able to um, go into any game mode or any sealed event and be good consistent in this game.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, just because we're on the topic of sealed, it's very interesting with this game. I only discovered Keyforge in November, a couple of days actually before the release of the game. And that was a few days after the release of the latest Pokemon set. And I was telling my fiance, I was saying to her, I want to play a card game because it had been a while since I had actually played a real face-to-face card game. I was playing Pokemon online just, to get the urge out of the way, and I wanted to get back into something. And I was telling her, I was saying, sealed. I like how when they release a new expansion set, they have a tournament style, I guess, organized play where it's all sealed and everybody's drafting, like back in the day with Magic. And I was saying to her, I wish there was a game where it felt like that, where because I don't want to go into the game with somebody who already pre-selected the best cards. I want to go into it where we're all trying to test our wits by seeing what can we pull off given the limited resources of cards that we have. And then 3 days later, 4 days later, I found out about Keyforge.
Few people I've talked to who said they stopped playing Magic and started playing this. Like that was like they couldn't keep up with certain events or the cost of the formats or whatever it was, and they tried this out and then they just basically dropped Magic. Now that's not to say they won't go back after a while, but I think it's really interesting to hear people saying, "Oh yeah, I just dropped playing the game I normally play because their formats I prefer. This game always is, or it's more cost efficient, or whatever." And it's really cool to see people kind of coming over from the trading card games, which is kind of the purpose of this game, I think.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm really curious to see how, where Keyforge kind of ends up, in the rankings. I don't know how you describe it, but among the other guys, if it'll where it'll find its footing. Because I was kind of worried for a while that maybe especially Magic players would look at Keyforge like a baby version of a card game. Just you can't build your decks. The cards are very simple. They don't have these big, crazy, elaborate, effects that require giant rule books to find rulings on. Like, I was worried it was kind of going to get shunned and get a bad name like that. And it seems like, by and large, I really haven't heard anyone complain about it. Granted, I haven't been anywhere that somebody would have complained, but I haven't heard Magic people shunning, or anyone for that matter, kind of shunning the game, talking about how it doesn't work, anything like that. And granted, I've been in these echo chambers of, the Keyforge subreddit or the Keyforge Facebook group or the Discord or whatever. So I'm not around, just your kind of average players. I'm only around the fans, but it seems like it's had an overwhelmingly positive
Oh yeah,
response.
yeah. I think it's like a handful of comments I hear every now and then, but nothing major. It's like one out of every 20 people complain. It's like okay, whatever. I'll just move on as long as we have enough people to keep the game going.
Sure. Yeah, it'll be really interesting to see where it ends up. How it competes. If it, and I don't know. I don't know that I expect it to compete with Magic. Head on, but I could be totally wrong. I would love for that to be the case. I'd love for it to be a real serious card game, and then I can feel justified in investing all my time and effort into, and really like knowing that this fun hobby I have is not eventually going to go to waste, or it's not you know uh, not going to waste, but it won't be for nothing. The game's not going to fizzle out soon, and I certainly don't think it's going to fizzle out. So I'm happy about that. Like, I can pretty confidently say that. I'm not a market analysis or anything like that, but it's safe to say that this game's sticking around. People, it can't stay on the shelves, but where it'll where it'll land as far as like how you know LGS will support it, things like that. If it'll get decent events, like I guess the reason I'm so on the fence and curious about it is because the game store I go to, the past two events have been pretty awful. The first event I went to, which I think was their first one, 6 people showed up, which wasn't bad. The second one I went to, um, I guess I've only been to two. And the second one I went to, me and another guy showed up, and that was it. And I kind of I reamed my store. I've been pestering him. I've been really obnoxious to him because they're not doing the events right. If you set up an event on Facebook, you can set it up as a recurring event. But if it's a recurring event, it like doesn't even pop up in the event list. So I realized this because I was checking to see if the event was at 7 or 7:30, and I went to the page and it didn't even pop up. All their their Magic events, Pokemon events, stuff like that did. But so I've kind of gone at them a couple times like, hey, fix this, because everyone benefits if you spend 5 extra minutes and make an event for each week.
Yeah.
You make sales, you bring people out there, you spread the name. It just it works for everybody. Literally everybody benefits from it. But um, at their store, they've got, I guess to bring it back around to my point was they've got a whiteboard with their events, and it's like 5 days out of the week they've got different Magic events, for different formats, stuff like that, and then one night for Dragon Ball Super, one night for Keyforge, stuff like that. But I'm curious, if it'll start to compete, if there'll be two Keyforge nights, or things like that, if it'll kind of gain that footing. But only time will tell. All we can do is do what it seems like almost everyone in the community is doing, just like going out there and so aggressively promoting the game, as much as they can. It seems like everyone recognizes they kind of have to be the foot soldiers and spread it for it to succeed. And that's been a really interesting kind of aspect of it to watch, just the kind of the community coming together to like really just, shout it from the rooftops and trying to do anything they
Oh yeah.
can to keep it alive.
Yeah, and I'm really pissed off at the local game stores right now because honestly, this is the perfect opportunity for Keyforge. It's coming at a time when there's a mass exodus of Magic players because of Wizards of the Coast shooting itself in its own foot with this ridiculous notion of like $20 Ultimate Masters packs or $600 boosters. It's a prime market. Keyforge is ready to take in players who are looking for a new home, but all these players that are coming from Magic, they're not just casual. They're gonna be looking for a lot of play action. They're used to Friday Night Magic being a guaranteed event that they go to every Friday. They're used to events all the time. If there's no events, then they're gonna get bored. They're not gonna play this game. It's not gonna look competitive to them at all. And I've noticed that local game stores have been dropping the ball. Either they're not going to get on Keyforge, even though it doesn't cost them anything to organize play and not just, they don't have to get the product, they just do the play. Or when they're doing the organized play, they're running it terribly. As you had mentioned before, some of these local game stores are going to potentially stifle play and make it not fun and useless for people because they're right now they're doing casual. Some of these, and I only have three local game stores, by the way, in New York City that are running organized play, and it's only every other week. Now there is a good handful of people that show up, about 15 to 20 people at all the stores. That's great, but some of the stores are doing weird things where they're charging like $14 for Archon, and handing out, instead of handing out the recommended one pack of tokens per person, they're splitting that up amongst 8 people and really limiting the rewards. It's like you cannot do that. You cannot raise the price and you cannot limit the amount of promos because then nobody wants to come. Nobody wants to come. Nobody wants to play. Nobody wants to play. Nobody's going to buy the game.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to see what happens in terms of like how this game gets played. Because super early in the game right now, having only had the game out for, let's say, a few weeks, um, I feel like it could be a game that facilitates every level of play really, really well. From casual, buy a deck and play at your kitchen table with some friends, to sealed events that are, again, I mean, if it's sealed, it's a little bit more on the casual side. To the adaptive play formats where it's probably the closest, most balanced um, game format. I think it was Team Covenant that was saying that on one of their um, live streams, and how it feels like probably the most balanced game type that exists. And tough to disagree with them. to FFG's actually organized play, and like whether they do regionals and nationals and worlds, and which will probably be Archon format. I feel like the game is set up to accommodate all of those formats really, really well, and they're situated to kind of take advantage of those things probably more than any other card game that's ever existed. So it'll be really interesting to see how well they do in terms of taking advantage of that.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. Actually, a good idea to like to lead that into something I would love to talk about is the whole formats that this game does allow and what those formats mean and how they appeal to different players. Because I've had a chance to play a few different ones myself, and I've actually watched Team Covenant pretty regularly myself, and the adaptive format is absolutely brilliant as far as the most skill based format that exists for the game, especially in its current state. Um, but like all of the formats,
Explain adaptive format for those who don't know.
adaptive is a best of three format, and each person will bring their one deck that they want to play. You'll play one game, then you'll swap decks and play a second game. If the same person wins twice, meaning they won with both decks, they win the match. If the same deck wins twice, meaning each player won one game, they go to a third uh, round and they bid chains on who gets to play the winning deck. So it tests not only your ability to play your deck that you brought, it tests your ability to evaluate your opponent's deck and be able to play it once you swap and be able to find those combos and other card interactions, as well as figuring out how to counter your own deck. And then if you happen to go to the third round, it tests your ability to evaluate the deck on a level like for the bidding for chains. Like how much could you really go down on cards to make that deck work, if it's even worth it? Plus, there's the whole skill of bidding and maybe bluffing your opponent on a bid or all. That's a whole other level. But there's so much to that, and it's the only format or one of the only formats that balances out decks. Like I could bring the absolutely worst deck, or you could bring the absolutely best deck, and then we swap regardless. and if one happens to win both and is that bad, we just go crazy bidding chains on it and kind of balances it out, which is I think an interesting way to play the game.
This is a total game changer if they make this adaptive format as an official format for their pro tournaments. Total game changer for the card game industry by far, because now you're not only thinking about what deck you're going to play, but you're worried that your opponent is going to play your deck.
Yep. Can they play it better than you?
Yeah, you can't go too OP, because even if they can't play, if their skill base is worse than you and your cards are so good, they're going to screw you over. So yeah, it's such a cool.
Absolutely brilliant. Yeah, no, I completely agree. And that's what's so cool about this game is you have that one format and it's really changes it up. But then if you just fall right back to Sealed and Archon, just the baseline formats, it's a completely different game right there. Like with Archon, it's just play your deck to the best ability to counter your opponent's deck to the best of your ability. Um, and then with Sealed, being able to evaluate your deck on the fly to play against a complete unknown, and that's just three different formats right there that we're talking about, and all going to be played very differently. Um, and and really, it only costs you $10 to do any of these and do them forever, just about, which is amazing. And we're not even, and then no, excuse me, we're not even talking about the other formats that are out there. Like I've done reversal twice at the one store. Once they ran out of product and they wanted to keep doing events, they've done reversal. Um, and reversal's fun.
What is
Okay,
reversal?
so reversal is you bring a deck and you swap it with your opponent. It's just a best of one. So the idea is you bring your worst deck, obviously, because your opponent has to play the deck that you bring, and they have, and you win with their deck is the goal. So generally speaking, you want to bring your worst deck. So it tests a player's ability to evaluate a deck again on the fly, and you have to do this every round too. So it's not like I just have to do it once. It's each round I get a new deck. I got to figure out how to play it immediately. So that's a brilliant system there and really interesting. But there is a negative that I've come to find after doing this twice. Because we're playing lower powered decks, generally speaking, you see less overall board control, like less board wipes, less amber control. I mean, this is typically, I'm sure there's some other bad decks out there that have a bit more of those things, but a lot of the ones I've seen have a lot less of that. So, because of that, interacting with the opponent's amber becomes a little bit more complicated or harder to do. Creature heavy decks, or just even if not super heavy on creatures, just even in about mid range, they tend to stick more, and combat becomes a bit more prevalent or a bit more important as a way to control the game rather than in your other more powerful formats. Um, with another issue we had, this happened recently. A person only owned 2 decks, and we were playing reversal, so they just had to use one of their decks, and their deck actually wasn't a bad deck. So they're kind of forced to have to give somebody a good deck 'cause that's all they owned at the moment, which that wouldn't typically be the case, but that is an issue with some formats. If you don't own a certain number of decks or whatever, you could be at a restriction there compared to other people. So there's a few negatives. As fun as the format has been to try to explore a deck as well as evaluate decks on the fly, or even bring your worst deck. Trying to find your worst deck is quite difficult. Like the one I played last week, I'm gonna just drop it here, called Natural Peter of the Gully, but Peter is spelled Pjetur. Um, Natural Peter of the Gully. It's Bromnar Sanctum Untamed. The Bromnar has 2 loot the bodies, so it's in a lot of other cards that make it really fight focused, but it only has 2 creatures in it: a Headhunter and a War Drummer, which is really bad. Like, but the combo in the deck, or one of the things you're trying to do with it, has a card called Sound the Horns that lets you dig your deck for a Brobnar creature. So you're likely just to cycle your entire deck with that card, which is what one of my opponents did. And the Untamed in this deck is actually quite good because it has Key Charge and some other really good creatures. And I wouldn't really want to let my opponent play this type of deck, but I felt like it had enough disadvantages that I could play around its positives. Um, this actually was a friend decks of mine, a friend's deck, excuse me. Um, but yeah, like digging through your collection to find an actually bad deck that's going to be hard to play is quite difficult. So it makes that format interesting, but it's not a perfect format, and you have to change it up because it's one of those things I think will just pure Archon without an organized play system in place could get stale after a while. When you can see a lot of the same things, I guess.
Yeah, I could see myself going and playing with some bad decks in a format like that after I've been so used to the speed and the overpoweredness, I suppose, of the regular formats. I think that the other card games that we've mentioned before, like Magic and Pokemon, because of their inherent flaws, are so polarizing that a lot of the people who are going to pick this up for casual play are probably going to like this game because they could play a format that highlights bad decks. So it doesn't really matter. The cards don't matter. It's the player. It's having fun.
Well, yeah. I mean, it'd be hard to do a reversal format in a lot of these collectible card games because you'd have to add a whole bunch of restrictions on deck building. Because obviously in Magic, it's like, all right, 60 lands. Like, it makes no sense. But in this game, you don't have to have any more restrictions. You just say, bring a deck. And that's it. Done.
Do you guys have a favorite format?
Adaptive. If we're talking about just pure skill, as well as having the opportunity to try to figure out the puzzle of your deck and your opponent's deck at the same time.
Yeah, the competitive side of me says adaptive, so that you can bring your. I still think there's not a deck building, but a skill in selecting the right deck if you're going to an adaptive tournament, because you could bring a deck that you have a lot of practice with that is not simple to play. You could look through your decks, get really good at a deck that is maybe not very straightforward, but is still really good if you know how to play it. So your familiarity with your deck, um, especially if it's still a really strong deck, because when it comes to bidding chains, um, if you're bidding for your deck, I think you're at a slight advantage because um, if you win even with chain, you're more familiar with that better deck, the deck that both players want to play with. And then if you lose the bidding, that your opponent will be playing with a deck that they're not as familiar with, and that may be a little bit trickier to play. So there's still that side of things in terms of like evaluating decks. You talked about that a few minutes ago, and deck choice and evaluating decks and all that is still going to play a major factor even in the adaptive format. So yeah, the competitive side of me still says adaptive format. The casual fun side of me says, if I really just want to go out and have a good time, I think sealed is probably going to be the most fun format.
Oh man, I'm gonna go with well, not the opposite, but I wanted to say that I do agree with the notions on adaptive, but I think that sealed being what inspired Richard Garfield originally and being so up to I guess up to luck and up to the mercy of the RNG gods. I think that sealed probably has adaptive by a bit of an edge because you could get totally shafted in sealed, and if you can overcome that disadvantage, that's really where the crazy skill lies. And I think that the power balance is not going to be as noticeable in adaptive versus sealed.
Interesting, because I still think that the I still think there's a strong possibility, and maybe more often than not, this won't happen. More often than not, you go out there, you play sealed, and the best player will most likely end up at the top table. Maybe not win, but the best few players will probably end up at the top, right? Um, but there's always going to be situations where that one stupid deck shows up and just destroys house and just kills everything, regardless of that player's skill. So I think that's probably the one negative side of sealed. But that's probably the case in any game, right? You play sealed and you happen to draft or you happen to pull a decent combination or whatever, and there's always the possibility that the players that are not quite as skilled as others end up winning. And I guess that's probably the beauty of sealed at the same time, because an average player can show up and still has the possibility of winning. Like that, what's better than that for to attract people and get people to come in and play this game, right?
Yeah, I could definitely agree with the negative point that you brought up with sealed, that uh, an unskilled player could end up with a fantastic deck. But then again, I mean, they could buy a fantastic deck and go to adaptive with it.
And that's not even necessarily a negative. Like, why not? Why is it a bad thing that an average player can show up and win an event? Like, that's great, is it not?
Oh, sorry, I don't mean negative isn't bad. As a contradiction to sealed being better than adaptive. I mean, yeah.
I think that's what it comes down to is what do you want out of Keyforge, or at least out of the events that you're attending? Because each of these events are going to have very different appeals. Like I really enjoy Sealed as well, but if if I want that sort of brand new discovery experience and maybe chaos, Sealed is perfect for it. But if I want something a bit more like a hard level competitive, putting our skills to the deepest test, I think there could be some issues with Sealed with some of the decks that you can open. As sure, being able to play a brand new deck will test skills for sure, but I think there's definitely some large variance between some of the decks that are out there. Like I've seen some absolutely bizarre or bonkers decks as far as power level variance. Um, and also I think certain houses may be or certain cards may be easier to play, or certain combinations may be easier to play, which can then I guess helps. I don't know. I guess that helps anybody be able to use the deck. Um, so I'm not sure if that's really for or against the point of skilled players doing better or worse. I guess that's again, what are you wanting out of the event? Because in the case of Seal, as you were saying, that maybe an average player could win because they pulled a great deck, and if that's what you want, or if you don't mind that, then that's absolutely fine. But if you're going to say a high level tournament, Sealed wouldn't be the format for you because you're relying maybe a bit more on variance of the deck generation than you are on the skills of the players.
You know what? In the end, you get a whole bunch of choices, and I think that's the best thing about Keyforge. That you get what you want out of it.
Yeah, absolutely,
There's a little
absolutely.
for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why I think I've been loving it so much, because of all these options, and then I can pull other people in it, because when I'm telling about the games, like, oh, this is how you play the game, and here's the normal way you play it. But hey, you could also do reversal, and we could just bring our worst deck. And because people usually question when I say, "Oh, can't customize your deck, so you can just get a bad deck." They question that as soon as you say that, so I immediately follow up with, "Well, there's also a format for you where you can bring your worst deck and see how like much your opponent can deal with it, or how trying to play against it, whatever." And it's really funny because the couple reversal formats I went to, this last one especially, when my opponent draws their opening hand and they're like, oh my gosh, how do I use this? This is unbelievable. And then the whole game, they're sitting there staring at their hand, trying to make the pieces work. And it's really cool just to watch them trying to solve that puzzle that you've given them. It's really entertaining.
I'd have to say my favorite so far would be Sealed. Um, I don't know. I just like the idea of not getting stopped because it's not it's nowhere near as bad as Magic or Yu-Gi-Oh. Yu-Gi-Oh is especially bad with it because they've never rotated anything out. Where it's the person with the biggest wallet, the deepest wallet that usually has the best deck. They went out and they ponied up the money for the best cards, and they've just thrown everything they can at it to be able to beat you. And it's not quite that way with Keyforge, but it can be to an extent. There are some decks, as much as everyone might like to pretend it's not the case, there are some decks that are objectively better than others. And there's that stands true, to a kind of extreme side of it, where you can find a deck that is better than most, and just the card, it just has better synergy, or however you describe it. It works together better. It's more productive, things like that. So I like the idea of Sealed because it really does, like, it eliminates everything I don't like about card games, which is people throwing a bunch of money at it and buying the best deck. Everyone knowing what the meta is and playing that meta. Everyone, all the winners have the same kinds of deck. It avoids that. And it also avoids, it solves my personal problem of not really being able to, like, understand certain aspects of my own deck, and like being able to play it, or being able to look at a deck list and understand how that deck's supposed to be played and how to win with it. And it kind of eliminates that by, both you and your opponent open this thing up and you get 2 minutes to look at it, or 2 minutes to look at each other's decks, and then you have to go for it. And you know, I if it's a problem now, I don't know if it's a problem, but some decks are better than others. I don't think there's any that are necessarily terrible. I think there's probably some that aren't good. Um, but even if you get a bad deck, it does come down to how you play it. Just make the most of it, and how you kind of play your opponent, mentally, things like that. You can There's still a bluffing aspect to the game, so I feel like you're not totally at a loss. Like, if you're a good player, you might do all right. Especially maybe, if they introduce a sealed that's a 2 out of 3 kind of thing. I don't know, or a sealed where you swap decks, something like that. Some combination of that I would like, where you're not, you don't lose out because you have a kind of bad deck and just didn't draw right that one time. But um, I don't know. That's kind of why it's appealing to me. It's just I won't get stomped out by somebody that is throwing more money at it and might not necessarily be
Yeah.
better.
Well, sealed adaptive would be
But
fun.
it's all
Yeah, that's a great
yeah.
idea for sure.
There you
Right.
go, problem
Well, and
solved.
the other thing I was going to say about it, I just remembered, was I don't know how big of an issue it is now, if at all, as far as deck balancing goes, by whatever Magic computer assembles all these decks, but it's only going to improve. So the next expansion, the next set, whatever, however, in whatever form it comes out, these things are only going to improve. The decks are going to work better together. They'll probably work out the kinks where you get cards that call for humans when there's no humans in your deck, or things like that. I think those will get worked out, and a sealed format will become even more appealing because there's no possibility of getting just a broken deck. It'll just be, I don't know. And I don't know, I don't, I like that idea for my own selfish reasons, but at the same time, if everyone's deck can really compete with each other on a perfect level playing field, well, what's the point? I guess it does come down to your skill, but I I I think there needs to be some variance. You need to get bad decks, and there needs to be good decks. Otherwise, I don't think it'd be terribly fun, having a completely level playing
Yeah,
field.
for me, that's part of the fun, is that the hunt for that perfect deck. Like, I've opened probably 10 decks or so. I've purchased a few, I've sold, I've traded. And you're just improving your overall collection and hunting for, maybe 2 or 3 different styles of the perfect deck for you, I think is part of the fun.
That's exactly what I was going to say. I was going to ask if I could put words in your mouth because you said the perfect deck, and I was thinking, a better way to describe that is the perfect deck for you. Because it's everyone has different playing styles. Some people are starting from nothing. Some people are coming from, like we were talking about, some people come from Magic or traditional card games where their instinct and maybe the way they win is by controlling that board and just kind of playing the creature aspect of it. Other people may want to lean kind of into the weird, you know actions and amber control and things like that. And one, it sounds goofy to say, and it may or may not be true. There may be some sort of way to rank these decks where one is truly objectively better than the other, but I don't know. I think a lot of times it's some my one man's
Doesn't
trash
the
is another man's
ADHD
treasure.
rating do that?
I mean,
No,
not
no,
it.
I'm
No,
being
not
sarcastic.
definitively. Well, it's not a bad. I don't know. That's a hot topic
Yeah,
right
it
now, and
is.
it's not a bad way to kind of look at your deck. That's what I did. I had this pile of 12 decks in front of me, and I ran each of them through it and took screenshots of it, and like that's what got me to actually my librarian Heifetz. That's what got me to sleeve that one because it had like the best rating out of all of them. It was just in the green on all of them, and it was it lets you
It's a decent indication for sure. It gives you an idea. It gives you a decent idea.
there may be a way, there's that the algorithm might be able to figure it out. They might know what a really good deck is and a bad deck is, but it just unless you're a super genius, a card game savant, like your trash deck might be someone else's treasure deck. It just may not click with the way that your brain works and the way you play, which I think is another really cool, interesting aspect of it. It's there's more to it than just getting the current meta deck. It's getting the best deck you can find that works with your play style. And it goes with identifying combos too. You might be able to play and discover certain combos that someone else who may own that same deck wouldn't be able to find. So it's an interesting thing. It'll be really really cool to see how it kind of plays out, and especially how it evolves if they add any new game mechanics or things like that, or new algorithms to producing decks, stuff like that. It it's a cool kind of Wild West playing field that we're in right now, and I'm excited to watch where it goes. As far as on this list, I have a little list of potential topics right here, and we wrote down formats. We wrote down reversal, sealed, Archon, adaptive, and there was one on here that I wanted to talk about. I saw it on the Keyforge subreddit yesterday. Rico Peck, I think is the guy's name on our Keyforge game on Reddit. He said a new fun game mode I came up with. It's called, and I'm gonna butcher this name, Triumvirate, Triumvirate. If you want to go find that thread, it was an interesting idea that I haven't had a chance to play yet, but I would love to. It says, "Hey guys, I love Keyforge and the different game modes they have. After some game nights with my friends, I came up with a new fun game mode." And he specifies it's not meant to be balanced, but just for fun. But the kind of nature of it sounds like it would be balanced to an extent. He says, "I call it Triumvirate, and it works as follows. Each turn, you may use one card of each house you have. So in total, you will be using 3 cards per turn, 1 per house. So playing a card from your hand, using a card on the board, or discarding a card counts as using that card from that house. And the first turn can only use 1 card like normal." He says he tested it. It's quite fun. It unlocks some really interesting combos. And it requires you to really kind of think thoroughly and plan accordingly. Um, which it makes sense, having to kind of play you're playing one turn to actually do something on your next turn, way more so than normal. And I think it's a really interesting idea. I don't think it would be anything that would be adopted by an LGS or anything, but um, I, you know, on that same note, I guess it is like with Magic, it's the players who decide how the formats work. Like, didn't players come up with Commander, and then Magic just kind of said, "Well, screw it, everyone's
Yep.
doing it already."
Yep, absolutely. Same with draft and stuff.
And it's Keyforge is already so wacky. I just compared something else to Wild West, but it's kind of like that, just this unknown territory. I could see something like this kind of gaining steam if it's fun to play, just because of the nature of how it's already like that to an extent. You pick one house and you play from that house, and that's all. Um, I'm curious, if he's elaborated on rules or anything like that, as far as interactions with other houses. If you can, I don't know. I guess it all probably is self-explanatory if I just sat down and played it, but I don't know. I don't really have a question or anything to discuss about that. It just sounded like a really cool idea.
Did he mention like do you bring a deck to this or
Uh, I assume,
I think you would have to,
yeah, for
because
sure.
I mean Mars immediately almost goes away because Mars is so interactive with its own house. Things like Mother Gun are garbage. Like half the cards in Mars reference another Mars card that you have to use or spot or seek or whatever. So
That's a good point.
I guess that's my point. Is like cards like Full Moon or Hunting Witch become a lot less good, and you'd probably need to look for cards that have synergies, like cross synergies with other houses rather than synergies with its own house. So you'd probably have to bring a deck to this.
Yeah, that's a good point.
mhm, sure. Yeah, it would not be a fun sealed, sealed
Yeah,
Because
event.
like
too many of the decks would end up being like just really bad, really awkward.
that actually may be a major issue, like because you said like the full moon, but there's a ton of cards that you need a second card in house to do anything. I mean, Mars is like my number one house, so I'm thinking all the cards now that you mentioned it that just don't work here. If I have to I ready another Mars creature, or I do something with Mars creatures, well then it's pointless because they can never be used after I ready it. So yeah, this would have to be a very tweaked format, and then even then, since the game wasn't designed around it, it's probably going to be clunky without a whole bunch of tweaking.
You know, it just like popped into my mind. I love this idea, not necessarily because of the way it'll play, but because it gives you a reason to collect. Like it starts to pull in the kind of traditional, not buying boosters and stuff like that, but you would have a special deck for this game mode. You wouldn't just have like, here's my, because that's as it stands right now. We as collectors and things like that, we have a handful of Keyforge decks and we cycle through the ones we like, but they're all for the same thing. They're all just the best decks that play the best in this Archon format, whatever. But with this, it's your best deck for Archon, whatever, is not your same best deck
Hmm.
for Triumvirate, however he
Triumvirate.
pronounces it.
Yeah,
Yeah, you know what I'm thinking? I'm thinking that this format would actually be really fun with a bad deck. Because anyway, with a bad deck, you're going to be limited with the amount of plays that you can do in a turn. You're probably not going to have some bomb hands. So this might work with bad decks. And I don't know what you guys think about that. And as well, what do you guys think if this one actually, if instead of just being able to play 3 times a turn or 3 cards a turn, one per house, if you could actually play four, and the fourth one is a random, wild card, so you could actually still use some of those cards that call on another card of the same type,
That's a good idea.
and it,
Mhm.
it keeps it will keep it interesting, at least for bad decks.
It would yeah, it would unbreak a
Yeah,
lot
that
of
would
that.
actually help a lot.
It'd make sure many more decks would become usable. That's an interesting idea, a nice variant to that.
yeah. I thought that was interesting what you said about um, needing to find different decks for different formats because, as I was talking about earlier, even the adaptive format might be a different deck than your Archon deck because if you know again, my competitive side thinks if I'm going to an adaptive tournament, I'm probably going to sift through my decks, look for the deck that's really good, but the most difficult one to play. So that when I play my first game, I'm probably going to win with my deck if it's a really good deck, but slightly difficult to play. And then when I give it to my opponent, they won't know what to do with it, and there's a good chance that I'll win that game as well, or there's a better chance that I'll win that game, I should say. So your adaptive deck could very well be different than your Archon.
And over time, you're going to end up naturally collecting a bunch of decks anyway. If you're a casual player and you've been going to sealed 5, 6 times, suddenly you've got a little bit of a collection already. And sealed is probably the best value proposition for an average player because you're paying $12 and you're coming away with a bunch of promos in a deck, and a few decks later on, you've got enough to participate in all facets of the game.
This is something I think actually was a good idea to cover because I see this as being an issue. Is time limits because there's a handful of formats like the adaptive or anything that requires a best of three that the current like organized play time limit is 90 minutes, and that may be long for some players, but there are a lot of decks or just times where games will go longer. And because of that, that limits when you can hold events or like people can be can't be around as long because it takes a lot longer to run a full event. Um, so like I've been kind of searching for what sort of formats do people think are the best of, like, for best of one or for like that short time period, because one of my regular meetups is on Tuesday night at 7 o'clock and they close at 10, so it's like a 3 hour gap, and there's no way we could ever do anything else that involves more than one game. So besides Sealed, if we don't have a product, and besides Archon, which is a best of one Archon format, what other options are there? I guess the only one they've ever really mentioned was Reversal, but not everyone's going to do that either, especially if there's limited product. So what are our other options? Like, I think that's something that has to be considered with these formats. Unfortunately, is this the time constraints? Like, and if you best of one doesn't work as well with pure Archon, I find without the organized play system in place that they're going to be giving us. I think the Archon thing isn't going to take off quite as well until we have more system in place for it. But like Sealed is fine. I mean, people love that. One of the other formats that they mentioned in the organized play guide is Triad, which is you bring 3 decks, your opponent benches one of them, and then you have to win with the other 2 decks, or something like that. Well, I was thinking, just for the sake of time constraints, you bring 2 decks, your opponent benches one of them, and you play with one of the decks. So this way, you can still get it done in one game. It involves a little bit more decision making or choices beyond I just bring my best deck, you bring your best deck, or whatever. As we've already discussed, there's so many options with this game or different formats you can play, and then as a result of that, reasons to have many different decks. Like, just my mind was spinning here, and I was thinking, well, you could have a format where you bring 2 different decks, and both decks cannot share any houses or can only share one house. That would be interesting when your opponents have to vote something out, or you play with multiple decks or whatever. Um, yeah, it's just like I help organize a lot of the events around here, so I'm constantly trying to figure out new formats or ways we can have formats available for certain time periods, certain setups, or whatever.
Themed events might be kind of neat. And I don't know how strict the requirements would be, but even if it was just a single house, your deck has to be logos, and I don't think you could get away with doing 2 because the chances of everybody being able to come and have 2 of the same house in the deck seems unlikely. But surely everyone's got a deck with logos in it, or I assume, maybe not, but I think that'd be a cool kind of format, because then it kind of breaks it away from the just you have your one OP deck, unless you get lucky and it's your house. But I that's something I'd like to participate in. Something that kind of cycles through and has some requirements like that. What are you guys' thoughts on the most taboo Keyforge subject of them all, constructed?
Go play something else.
Play with somebody who's not going to tell anybody else that you played that format.
Wow.
Like, it's like, come play Keyforge, but it's not Keyforge at all. Like, that's the whole point of this game, is that it's not constructed, and that every deck is different, and the discovery, and like, it's just the complete opposite of the entire spirit of the game. Like, I don't know, like, you look at these, like, double in the Pent Seed, library access key charge decks, like, just literally, if you could build your own deck, um like, whoever wins the flip and goes second will just win every game.
Or not necessarily. That's assume. I don't know. And I
I
I
mean,
guess
I might be
I'll explain my
exaggerating a little
stance
bit,
on
but
it.
just the combos that are available are
No,
just stupid.
sure, right. Well, and I'll put myself out there. I am excited about the thought of playing constructed, um, for a number of reasons. Had this been a normal, traditional card game with that's built around a constructed format, I would have liked it just as much. I what's appealing to me is that it's so new, and I can get on the ground floor. I can learn with everyone else. I can learn the cards at the same pace as everyone else. I'm not just you jump into Magic and you're a small fish jumping into the Shark Tank. But I think I'm for a even if just an unofficial constructed format. I think it would always be unofficial, but it's for one. I'll say this, and this isn't necessarily you guys. It's just to everybody. Some people are real elitist about it and are saying kind of what whoever said it earlier about, go play something else, but a million times more aggressive. I'll tell you guys to chill out. Because people are going to play what they want. It just like formats. They'll people are going to come up with different ideas, and they're going to test the boundaries of their game, and they're going to see what's fun. And if people are enjoying themselves playing, a constructed format, just screw off. Like, let them have fun. And I only say that because I've seen people be so freaking mean at these, new people coming to the community that are really excited about it and are just asking, hey, what's the deal with the constructed format? Does anyone, how does that work? Does anyone have any feelings on that? And they just get rushed, ran right out. They get beat down and insulted and just bullied, and it's kind of gross to watch happen, especially on like the Facebook
Yeah, I
groups.
think that's the nature of the internet in general, right? You mention a taboo, and you're gonna get people are just gonna be mean because they're mean on the internet, for sure.
And last episode, I talked about we're lucky right now. I'll say it and fast forward. We're lucky that this game is so brand new that we as the players get to dictate how it works. And a big part of that is how the community works. So right now, it's not like Magic where everyone's set in their ways and there's this level of kindness or lack thereof that's acceptable. With Keyforge, especially there's one Facebook group, there's one subreddit, like there's one Discord. The community is not fragmented. We can kind of, as a whole take over those places and dictate, how much douchebaggery we're going to
Mhm.
allow. We can really we can shut that stuff down, not for long. We don't have long before it spirals out of control, but we can kind of set the pace for how, how people interact
Set
with
the
each other
culture,
and how.
right?
You
The
cut out
culture
there,
of the
Nick.
game.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm hoping people kind of hear that message and do that. Yeah, the guy Simon that runs the Facebook group, he does such a good job of kind of shutting down any of that aggressiveness and nonsense, and he goes and private messages people to make sure they're okay and they're having fun. And I'm not, I don't think everyone in the community is snowflakes need to be treated like such, but I guess to bring it all the way back around to the constructed thing, if you don't like the idea of constructed, and I totally understand why, it's not lost on me. I'm not stupid. It's a unique deck game. That's the point. But if you don't like the idea of constructed, don't play it. Don't talk about it. Don't just let it be. Like, you don't gain anything. Nobody wins by you going out there and bashing somebody who wants to try constructed. All you do is piss people off and make the community sour, and that's that. But the on the topic of constructed, I think I intend to try it myself. I'm amassing all these decks. I'm gonna, shuffle them all together, the shitty ones that I don't like, and me and my buddy are gonna try it out. I'm sure we'll record it all, put it on YouTube, and like really give it a thorough trying. And one thing we've thought of as far as rules, to avoid anything too crazy, is you can have one of each card. You cannot have any duplicates. And I'm not sure yet. But I think there'd have to be a ban list, and I don't know if it would spiral out of control. A ban list and a list of cards that cannot exist together. Just have the kind of it'd be the way Yu-Gi-Oh has. I forget how many. You have 3, 4 of each card, something like that. 3. I don't know. But then there's a list of limited cards, which you may only have 2 or 1 of. And then there's banned cards, which you may have 0 of. It'd be something like that, but they'd be on a limited list or exclusive list, maybe you'd call it that, where you can't have any 2 cards on this list. When it might just be.
That's actually what like FFG does that with a lot of their card games. They call it a restricted list, and if they're like, say they're in this game, bait and switch and key charge. If they're on the restricted list, you can only have one of those in your deck. So if you have bait and switch, you can't have key charge, etc. And that's what they've been using that for years because it's kind of a straightforward, simple system that people can follow. It doesn't always work, but it's a good
Right.
start for
And
sure.
I think something like that would be just absolutely necessary for a game like Keyforge, because the cards are kind of broken if they're getting thrown together in the wrong way. But I don't know. Your opponent's deck would be just as broken. So the game would change pretty drastically in terms of speed and playing style. It might end 10 times faster. It might, I don't know, but you're just as you have the exact same ability to, make a broken deck along with, half broken and half counters that stop your opponent's deck from being broken. I think it would level out. We'll find out, but it's, you can burn me at the stake if you want for liking the idea of it. I certainly won't say that I like the idea of it more than the way it exists now. I like it because it's a unique deck game. But it's I'll put it this way, for anyone that's real salty about it, it's going to happen. It's constructed, it's going to be a thing, and it's probably going to be a decently widely adapted thing. Lots of people are probably going to play it and play it regularly, and there's nothing you can do about it. And you're only embarrassing yourself by getting upset about it publicly. That's kind of what I'd say about it. Just, and back, like I was saying earlier, just be cool. Just, if you don't like it, that's fine. You maybe explain jokingly why you don't like it. Don't be sarcastic, but don't start fights with people. Don't, you're not doing anyone any favors, and you're certainly not doing the game any favors, because it's in, we can really use anyone. People that want to play constructed are going to do you a favor. They're going to go buy decks. FFG's numbers are going to go up. They're going to talk about it with their friends. Like, it only serves, to benefit you by the game becoming more and more popular. So just, consider that as a silver lining, and just let it be. Don't be nasty.
Yeah, I want to throw my 2 cents in there and actually add to what you're saying. Simon's a cool guy. You brought him up. He's the head of the Keyforge group on Facebook. He's very chill. I played a few games with him before, and he's got the right idea, and you got it too. Look, this is a new game. We're a small community, and we want to build it up. It's not going to help to trash talk. There is a huge difference between talking shit, which a lot of people tend to lean towards because it's the internet, versus just making a joke about it. And we can't have a level of animosity that's going to stop people from participating and picking up this game and being curious about it, at least not so early in its infancy. Because if we want the game to survive, we're going to have to work together to make it attractive, make it civil, and throw in our suggestions, because this game is going to change. FFG is obviously going to listen to us and take into consideration what the fan base is going to say and what they want in the future. Imagine 10 years from now, this is going to be a totally different game than what it is right now. Sure, the basic principle of it will stand, but we're going to have formats we probably never even considered right now because of that evolution of the next decade. So you got to throw in your 2 cents in there. You got to, if you have a cool idea for the game, explore it. Everybody should be talking about this game and discussing topics civilly, and try to find what the best thing for the community would be for the game to expand it. And that's not going to happen when there's just trash talking. But if you have a great argument, you don't need to resort to incivility. And
Absolutely. I'll definitely agree with both your statements there. When I say go play something else, I say that somewhat tongue in cheek. The game obviously is going to get played in whatever way people want to play it, and I think all the more power to you. I just think that it'll I just feel like it'll end up being really silly. And I might be wrong. And you know what? Hope I'm wrong. I hope people try it and find out a way to, put an algorithm on the algorithm to ban certain cards and whatever the case is. And adapt your format so that you can play constructed. But I just think there's so many powerful cards, and the amount of capturing, right? Like, you could probably build a deck that does nothing but capture, just all creatures that capture, and then like you'll never be able to forge a key, or somebody will forge a key on it'll the game will last 3 turns. And it's going to take and this is just my opinion, and again, I hope I'm wrong, but I think it's going to take so much rule writing and banning and you know whatever the case is, fixing of the format to make it work, that I think it may never get off the ground. But you know what? I hope I'm wrong. I just think that might end up being the
Yo,
case.
guys, what do you think about this? And with the constructive, I was thinking, because as a potential expansion idea, I was thinking, what if they introduce a potential option where you have like a side deck, kind of like what they did in Yu-Gi-Oh. But what if with constructed, instead of selecting the individual cards, you can take three different houses, three different house stacks from three different decks, and put them all together for one deck. Kind of like the triad, where you bring three decks, but you could take a third of each one and put it together for that, and that would be a hybrid of constructed and
So you're saying you take the 12 cards that are Mars from one specific
yeah,
deck, and then you pair that with 12 cards that are shadows from another specific deck with 12 cards that are dis from a third
yeah,
Ah,
specific deck.
yeah. So like
very
your three
interesting.
triad decks, you just take the 12 of each house, from each one, and you make that one deck out of it. So it's like a hybrid of constructed, and it's still the random generation of the house.
Yeah, that's
That's
interesting.
excellent.
It's actually almost like opening a booster pack and having to like each deck is a booster pack where you have to take out
Yeah,
1/3 of it to play with, which is interesting. That's like Archon Alliance is probably what I would call it because the Archons are working
that's
together
good.
and
Alliance.
trying
I mean,
to
I'm like taking notes
actually
here. Like
succeed.
I've never done this, like taking notes on what we've talked about. It's like I want to explore this. I really do love that because it's a compromise. Like it's something that most everyone can agree on. You're not just building the most OP deck you can, but you're kind of shedding like the downside to Keyforge is that like it's either good or it's bad. And if it's bad, then you sell it, whatever, you sit on it. Like it's not just a binary 1 or 0, whether it's good or bad. It's there you can it's you like you said, it's like buying boosters, and it'll scratch that itch for people that want to play this kind of unique different game, don't want it to be broken with constructed, but also want to be able to scratch their itch of buying and collecting, because that's what I like doing. Like I like buying a deck just as much as I like playing it. Like it's satisfying to me. It scratches that gambling itch I have.
Oh, sorry, I haven't had a chance to really throw in on this whole constructed thing, and I have all kinds of things to say now. Everyone's been talking like things that they've touched on, and I haven't even thought about myself a bit. Um, so if I don't want to interrupt though if you're going somewhere with your
No, go ahead.
sorry. Um, so first off, like as far as my own thoughts on it, when the game was announced, I expected constructed to happen at some point in the future based on the way the game was made. Not that I myself was intended on playing it. I just expect people to do that because it's no different than opening a booster pack. Ultimately, in that you have random cards, you don't know what you're going to get, and some people are going to want to try cards with other cards, whether they have the deck or not. They're not going to go search for it. It may be impossible to do so. So, some the counter to that people like to bring up is the game wasn't intended to be that way. Well, so many games that have been created, they're not necessarily always played the way they're intended, and in fact, they become a new game or a new format. The best example for this is Magic the Gathering. First off, when the game was created with the rarity system in place, Richard Garfield didn't expect people to go out and try to find all these different cards to make these crazy decks. And I think there also wasn't a limit on cards. I don't remember exactly. I know Netrunner didn't have a limit. Anyways, people started actually doing that and searching out cards and playing full playsets of Black Lotuses and that crazy stuff, to where it kind of broke the game, and he realized some of the issues with the design process and with the game's original intent. So just because a game was designed with a certain intent in place doesn't mean it has to be played that way forever. Like Draft wasn't really the case as far as an intended format. Commander wasn't the case as far as intended format. And Commander, they created their own rules to make Commander work by having a out of play zone for your commander that wasn't part of the game. That players can do that, and they have done that, especially in collectible card games. Collectible card games really need various formats to succeed and survive because some players just don't want to play constructed in card games or whatever. So having these other options really help open that up. As far as banned cards, I think that's or restricted cards that's going to happen. And if you think about other constructed card games, there is usually an absurd number of cards banned or restricted over time because as the card pool grows, you end up getting degenerate combos you didn't expect to have happen. So it's no different than that. It's not really a big deal. And you'll have some cards that are underplayed, and that's also the same case with customizable card games. That's not really a major issue here. And again, you don't have to play the game this way, but if you're looking into trying a constructed format, those are things to consider. But also, um, for me, constructed wouldn't be much different than going out and buying hundreds of boxes looking for the perfect deck because it's the same sort of thing. you're either trying to find that combination of cards in a deck, and sure, that may be fun, or you could just put the deck together yourself. No, it's no different. Ultimately, you're trying to get those cards to combine together in a deck a certain way. The difference is that you can control it if it was constructed, versus I just hope that the algorithm put something together for me that I want to work. So it's not terribly different. But like the last thing we just touched on, though, I think with let's call it that alliance format, where you mix one house from 3 different decks, um, that actually was kind of a system that FFG tried with the Star Wars LCG. The way that deck building worked in that game, you had a pod of cards. It was the objectives. The way you won that game was to complete objectives that your opponent had, or rather defeat them. Um, each objective came with, I think, 6 cards. You had to put all 6 of those cards in your deck. The idea is that you could have some underpowered cards with overpowered cards. It didn't quite play out that perfectly because there was some issues with certain cards just being that good, or some things just didn't balance out right, whatever the case was. Well, this idea of mixing archons is just like that pod idea, where I have to play all 12 of these cards no matter what's in that deck. So like I have to take I don't know, what's an example of a bad card from in a house that's just not that great. Sacrificial Altar. I have to take the Sacrificial Altar to get the Gateway to Dis or whatever in this Dis set, which would be very interesting. And I also would give people another reason to collect more decks, because, hey, I'm looking for this house combination or this particular house to have some of these cards that I would want to then try out with another deck or whatever. I think it could work. And since we're forced to use opaque sleeves anyways in organized play, what's the difference?
Yeah, we all have that deck with like that perfect combination of shadows cards, and then a garbage Brobnar package that just makes the deck brutal, right? Like all of these loot the bodies and war chests or whatever, and like 2 Brobnar creatures. But the shadows package is so good, and it's like, well, this deck is probably not very good because the Brobnar stuff is all just discards or whatever the case. So that does make it gives value to those decks, right?
100%. Yeah, I have a whole stack of stinkers that have a house that's just so beautiful, so perfect, and better than my best deck. And there's just no way I'm playing that deck because it's just not gonna work. There's -10 synergy.
Yeah, the deck I brought to reversal this week, the Untamed, is incredible. Sanctum is not bad, and Brobnar is trash. But the Untamed has like Key Charge, Mimicry, Kindreth, Longshot, Mighty Tiger, and 2 Niflapes and Nifflequeen. It's got some good stuff in it, but then everything else is just bad. You really don't want to have to use the other stuff while playing this deck. So that would be kind of neat. Then it's like, all right, well, this deck is junk. Other than reversal, I have nothing else to do with it. So let's just pull out a house and throw it in something else and see what happens.
Yeah, I think that could be a really interesting and like a very possible, uh, you know, adapted format. Um, that could actually gain some traction because I think it really satisfies everybody. I don't think the people that would be so aggressively against a constructed format would have those same complaints about this, because it allows the algorithm to create decks, and it also they've had the exact same complaints we do, where you pull a deck and one of those houses plays really well in the deck, and then another one is just an inconvenience to you, and it's ends up just filling up your hand and it's just garbage. They recognize those same things, so I think it's a nice middle ground. And for a game like this, I wouldn't be surprised if this, the potential format we're discussing right now becomes a real thing and a common, possible thing. And let's just, let's plant this flag in the ground right now. Library access, the keyforge.com
You're
invented
welcome,
this
community.
new alliance format.
You were all present for
it. That's
I
right.
will say though, now that
Yeah.
I'm thinking about it,
Think how fun this
That's
would
right.
be.
I think it would still have to have some rules. It couldn't be just that, because I have, I think, I don't know, 12 or 15 decks right now. I definitely have a deck that has Key Charge and Nepenthe Seed. I definitely have a different deck that has library access and phase shift. And I don't
Right.
have that many decks.
Is that not something that occurs in the wild?
Yes, but in like 0.02% of decks. And those decks are like ridiculous. And I think that it just becomes way too easy to put those broken combinations together.
Well, that brings up either a possible another point or two. So first off, if that, I mean, sure they don't exist very much, but maybe there's an issue with maybe some design issues rather, where certain combinations of cards are just like insanely busted. Even if it is one out of 100 decks or whatever, the fact that it happens and then somebody has to deal with it in an event or something could be very frustrating. But when it comes to for this concept of combining houses, that's where that restricted format comes into place. If your one house build has key charge and the other, or not key charge, Nepenthe seed, and then the other house for logos has a library access, you can't put them in the same deck. Like it's one or the other. You can't choose both. And it's a really easy list to make. Just a handful of cards to start and see where it goes from there, if necessary. I just thought of this, though I'm not sure how well this would work. A sealed alliance where you open 3 decks and you then have to choose the best houses out of the 3. But the problem is you could somehow only get like what happens if all 3 of your decks. Oh, I guess that works. If all 3 of your decks have the same 3 houses, but it doesn't matter. You still only picks one. So I guess that would work out. But that could be fun to have to
Yeah, or you
evaluate the
just
3 decks and find what's the best of the
apply
3.
the adaptive format to whatever you choose. You apply the adaptive format, and then that ends up, even if you do end up with your Nepenthe seed library access combo, um, you can still you still end up having to play against it in round 2, and you still have it to end up bidding 30 chains to take it round 3.
What I see being a more realistic possibility than buying 3 decks, I think you'd have a hard time getting people to come pony up $30. Maybe not. Is a draft style. Everyone throws in a couple bucks. $10 each, whatever, and then you've got 10, 15 decks sitting there, and then you separate them all into the houses. You look at the house list, things like that, and then you draft. You go in a circle and you pull the house you want, like that, and then you kind of build it right there. I could see that being a thing. I also, this is totally wishful thinking. It will not happen. If FFG would sell, boosters, quote unquote, of just single houses. If this were a format that actually gained traction, that could be interesting. Not having to buy a full deck. I guess it'd be no different, but
I almost kind of wonder what this game would have been like if they would initially just release it that way, where you buy a house pack and you had to play all those cards together. So it allows a tiny bit of customization while still requiring you to just play with what you get.
it was a big gamble. I'm sure they did their market research. I'm sure they knew, and all the people behind it are obviously super talented guys. But it seemed like it was a giant gamble to release this card game where you don't get to build a deck. I could have seen a scenario, like a reality, where it just tanked. It just did horribly because nobody liked the idea, and they're lucky that it gained the traction it did, and it had Garfield behind it and things like that. Um, but if you think about it, if you separate yourself from it and forget that you've had so much fun playing it, the idea, here's a card game where you don't get to collect cards. You don't assemble a deck. You buy a deck and then you play it. Like, it sounds really sterile, and I'm surprised it did so well. Maybe that's just me, but we've grown so accustomed to building a deck, and I still like, even though I'm playing this game, there, I'll answer the first question I asked. The hardest parts of getting used to Keyforge. That's been it for me, is not being able to build a deck, like wanting to kind of customize it, and seeing combos and not wanting to go either hope I pull it or spending $30 on eBay or Facebook or whatever to buy a deck that has that combo, and wanting to build it myself. I think that's been the thing I've been trying to get used to the most.
Yeah, I'm worried about this idea of the single booster of the house being a thing. I think that would probably break the principle of the game. I think the constructed idea or the alliance idea is really cool because if you want to play that, you're gonna have to plop down $30, right? Like a sealed adaptive alliance, and it's a very particular and specific part of the game that probably won't take off too much. It's not going to become the majority, right? You're not going to find 75% of all the players are going to want to play that for. I could be wrong, but I just don't feel that way, especially because it's a unique deck game. It'll be a small thing, and it won't break the game and the principle of it, because at the end of the day, if Keyforge suddenly is no longer a unique deck game and has a level of customization to the point of where you could buy the single house. Like, okay, you could buy the deck in the box, great. You bought the deck in the box and you can play all the formats with that deck. But when you're buying the single house just because okay, well, this deck sucks, well, this deck sucks, then it defeats the idea of why it was created.
Yeah, it becomes something else altogether.
I mean, I don't think you could add boosters in now. I think that would if they would have designed it with that intent and already have it set up in a booster system, but now you couldn't do it because it would definitely break the game system as is.
Right. To do something like that would be a complete pivot, which, I don't think it'll happen. It's something that could happen, if they realize like, hey, we're not doing so well with, just this unique deck format, this would possibly bring more people in. I could see them making a pivot. But if they were to do that, if they were to, sell boosters of houses, that would be the entire game pivoting to like alliance is how this game works now.
I guess to kind of to continue on with the point that you mentioned about like FFG making this sort of big gamble. It's kind of interesting to kind of look at why they did that. Why did they make this gamble? What was going on in the gaming industry or market to allow them to do this or think this would be a good idea? I mean, I think first off, just with collectible card games, have been taking some big hits, or people stop playing them. They get fed up with trying to keep up with formats, keep up with the cost of them, um, or the cards not being very useful or valuable, or just even to build a playable deck or worthwhile deck could take a decent amount of money, and in this game, just takes $10. Um, that's probably one of their first points. But I could also see because of the popularity of legacy games in the board game industry, where you get a game, you play through a series of events in that game, and then you make permanent changes to the game where you can't go back and play it from the start again because you've already permanently changed the board. Um, Between that and then the popularity of collectible card games, the maybe loot crate system, DLC, that sort of stuff, combining all those fads or interests in the industries, maybe that's what makes this game work. Is that the people out there, they don't mind playing a game where they may not be able to change it, they can't customize it, or it's maybe only has a short live. Like your one deck you buy, you play it at a sealed event or whatever, and then you play it a handful of times with your friends, you get bored with it, you go buy another deck. Like they don't mind doing that because they've been doing it with all these other games that exist currently on the market. So it's just interesting. Like, why did they make this decision, and why is it currently succeeding? Now, whether it lasts for a long time, we don't. That remains to be seen, and I hope it does. But at the moment, it's succeeding quite well.
Yeah, only time will tell. And I think the fact that it can't stay on the shelves right now is pretty telling in itself. Granted, it's a kind of a different thing. They're not mass producing these boosters at random. Each store gets a box, two boxes of whatever comes with 12 decks each, something like that. So it's not quite the same metric to boosters of a new game, but the fact exists that the cards can't stay on the shelves. They sell out, not even the day they get there, but in the next couple hours. After, typically, I guess Barnes and Nobles keeps a decent stock, but you go to your LGS and they get them in the morning and they're gone mid afternoon. So that's been my experience at least.
Yep.
So that's got to be telling to an extent. If it'll keep up is anyone's guess. But I think, you know, if something like this kind of these alternate formats, not necessarily constructed, but like an alliance thing, because if that were to pick up, I think it would drag in the rest of the potential players that are on the fence, because I've got no doubt in my mind that there are people who have heard about Keyforge and are interested in it, but won't play it because they can't customize their deck. And I don't blame them. I love that aspect of card games. So if something like that were to be, even moderately widely adapted, uh, yeah, I think
Considered,
that.
yeah. Oh, and that question that was brought up about paying $30 for an event. Magic pre-releases cost $30 to get 6 booster packs, a die or whatever, and you play in a tournament with it, and they sell like tons of entries of those. I mean, that's a very popular event style, and both for competitive players and for people just starting or very casual players. Like I go to pre-releases semi regularly. I know I've played against people who just started playing the game. I played against people who've been playing it for years, and it's like it's a $30 entry, and you do it once every few months. No one minds doing it. It's fun. So in an event where you go spend $30, get 3 decks, I don't think it would have any issues whatsoever selling. It's just right now we got to get the game or the community growing to be able to have all these different ways to play, because you can still do the go in buy 3 decks with the current system using the deck, the one where your opponent benches a deck and you play 2 out of 3 or whatever. You can still do that format as is, but if the alliance thing was just another option. So, and I definitely think people will do it, or people will have no problem doing that if it's only like once every few months or something.
Yeah, definitely. It looks like we are at, almost 2 hours, an hour 45, 45 minutes longer than I thought we'd go. So I think now's a good time to wrap it up. Ended on a decent, interesting note. Anyway, thanks for hanging out, you guys. This was episode 1, which is kind of the second episode. If you haven't heard the first one, it's episode 0. You can find it on anchor.fm. The show is called Library Access. You can also find it on our YouTube channel. It's youtube.com/thekeyforge. That channel will actually be home to several Keyforge podcasts. We're going to start up another one or two. Maybe this one's kind of a round table. The others will be maybe more news centered or gameplay centered, something like that. They'll have a particular focus. There'll also be gameplay videos, unboxings, things like that on that channel. And if you haven't already, check out thekeyforge.com. Actually give a shout out to the competition. You go to thekeyforge.com/podcasts, and you'll see our show as well as the other ones that are on there. I don't think there's anything wrong with shouting out the other shows, because there's everyone out there is hungry for Keyforge content. So after you listen to this episode, that's right, yeah, after you listen to this episode, you can go find it there. But anyway, thanks for hanging out, and we will see you next week.